Think about the oldest stories you know. I mean, not the stuff you saw on your phone this morning, but the really fundamental narratives. Tales of gods and kings, heroes, monsters.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing people have told since we first gathered around a fire. We're talking about the great enduring myth.
Exact. And these are stories you find whispered really in every corner of the earth, from, the frozen plains of the Norsemen to the sun-baked dust of the Near East.
Right.
And at their core, they're always about the same thing. Chaos versus order, the fight against the wilderness, and the dangers lurking in the shadows.
But why do they still have this incredible, almost magnetic power? These fantastical stories of shapeshifters and thunder gods.
Well, I think the short answer is that they're fundamentally about us.
A
mirror, exactly. A mirror reflecting these hidden forces that shaped our ancestors. Things like war, disease, social upheaval, and just the terrifying force of nature itself. But maybe most of all, they reveal the monsters lurking within ourselves.
Yes, that's the real insight, isn't it?
I think so. What the whole canon of mythology tells us is that we are not the clean, rational, organized human beings we like to think we are.
Not at all.
If we're being honest, we're big, squashy tubs of deep feeling that we can't altogether manage. And myths, they give us the narrative structure for wrestling with those turbulent, irrational emotions.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We've sifted through a whole stack of source material to really distill the core functions of these stories. So today we're going to look at 3 major ways these myths operate.
Okay.
First, how they wrestle with the twisting and often really destructive nature of love and desire. Second, how they function as vehicles for societal debate during times of rapid change. And finally, how they address the great certainties of mortality, law, and destiny.
A huge undertaking, but absolutely essential.
It is. So let's start with that first one, love. When we look at mythology today, it's so easy to categorize stories about relationships as, love stories. But that framing, it usually misses the mark when you apply it to ancient tradition.
Oh, completely. Very few of these classical narratives were strictly about affection as we'd understand it. They were almost always about something far more structural.
Right. Resting on things like power imbalances and the necessity of statecraft.
And that's the key insight. They aren't really telling us about romance. They're telling us about the fears, the aspirations, and the rigid gender and class structures of the society that made...
So marriage was a tool.
A powerful one. For the aristocracy in the pre-modern world, marriage was overwhelmingly about alliance. You married to cement a border, to fill a treasury, or to avoid a war. Personal happiness was, a distant and often totally irrelevant bonus.
Okay, so let's unpack that political side with what has to be one of the most bizarre and brilliant examples from the Norse tradition, the Lay of Thrym.
Oh, this one is fantastic.
The core of this is alliance versus affection, but taken to this absurd gender-bending extreme.
The stakes just couldn't be higher. Thor, the mighty god of thunder, he wakes up one morning and his hammer's gone.
Mjolnir, the weapon he needs to defend Asgard.
The essential weapon. And it's been stolen by Thrym, the chief of the giants. Thrym sends word back. He'll return the hammer, but there's a price.
And the price is Freya.
Freya, the goddess of love, has to agree to marry him.
And Freya, predictably, was not having it.
Yeah.
I mean, the sources say she refused with spectacular fury.
Which creates this huge diplomatic crisis, right? The gods have to get the hammer back, but Freya's dignity prevents the alliance. So what's the pragmatics?
It's insane. They decide Thor himself has to dress up as Thrym's bride.
With Loki, the trickster, as his bridesmaid, no less.
It's a remarkable piece of cultural commentary, isn't it?
It is. The need for the alliance getting Mjolnir back is so central to cosmic order that it just bulldozes over these fundamental gender and identity norms.
The hypermasculine god of thunder
has to wear the bridal dress, the jewelry, the veil, all of it just to seal the deal. This gender bending, as you called it, it highlights just how transactional marriage was. The giants didn't care about Freya's affection. They just wanted her as a bargaining chip.
But there's a detail in there about Thor's disguise that's so telling. He had to stay completely silent during the wedding feast.
Yes, because his deep voice would give him away immediately.
And that imposed silence while he's in these bridal robes. It feels profoundly revealing about the public face of Norse women.
Well, we know from the sources, especially the ones from Iceland, places away rating, that the reality at home was quite different.
More powerful.
Much more. Well, the social structure was, on paper, patriarchal within their own kinship network. Women were hugely influential. They were practically running the household economy, managing these vast...
So the story, in a way, is a reminder.
I think so. A reminder that while women might have seemed silent and meek in public or diplomatic settings, they were often the silent, powerful engine of that society.
So if the Norse myth shows us the transactional side of marriage, the Greek tale of Iphigenia shows us the horrifying price of a broken promise.
A promise tied direct with fake marriage.
This is a story about absolute betrayal in the name of political necessity.
It's brutal. King Agamemnon, the commander of all the Greek forces, has his fleet gathered at the port of Aulis, ready to sail for Troy, but he's stuck.
Right, he defended the goddess Artemis.
And in response, she stilled the winds. The entire invasion fleet is tracked. To get the winds back, the goddess demands a sacrifice. Agamemnon's own daughter, Iphigenia.
The lie that follows is what makes it so tragic. He sends a message to his wife, Queen Clytemnestra, telling her to bring Iphigenia to Aulis immediately.
Under the pretense that she's going to marry Achilles.
The greatest warrior. You could just imagine the journey, the anticipation. The sources say Iphigenia spent time having her handmaidens braid her hair with gold jewels, desperate to look her best for her wedding.
And then they arrive, and the grim, undeniable truth comes out. Clytemnestra realizes she's been tricked into delivering her own daughter to a sacrificial altar. Her reaction is just raw, agonizing grief.
But Agamemnon goes through with it anyway. He drowns out her screams with formal prayers. And the moment Iphigenia is sacrificed, and the sources differ on the details, the wind immediately starts to blow again.
And the fleet sails for Troy.
But that moment didn't just launch the war. It set the stage for 10 years of quiet, simmering rage.
Clytemnestra's grief and fury, it's channeled into this cold, unbreakable oath of vengeance. What she does to Agamemnon finally returns a decade, the direct, inevitable consequence.
It proves that the cost of political expediency can just destroy everything, the family, the state, all of it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move from Greek betrayal to the passionate obsession of the Celtic and Arthurian tradition, Tristan and Isolde. This story feels like a powerful metaphor for, well, overmastering desire.
Right, and again, the setup is political.
Yeah.
Isolde's marriage to King Mark of Cornwall, who is Tristan's beloved uncle, was purely to secure peace between kingdoms that had been at war for generations.
And Tristan, the king's most trusted knight, is tasked with escorting her from Ireland to Cornwall.
Catalyst for their passion, though, it isn't a slow build of affection. It's an accident. It's a love.
Which is such a crucial device for the story, isn't it?
It's a brilliant literary mix. The potion was meant for the married couple to ensure a good alliance. But when Tristan and Isolde drink it, it represents pure desire being forced.
So it sort of absolves them of the moral responsibility.
In a way, yes. It allows the authors to explore this clash between private passion and public without just making the heroes into simple villains.
The result is this excruciating triad of pain.
Exactly. Isolde marries King Mark, but the affair with Tristan continues. And the tragedy is amplified because all three of them genuinely loved her. Tristan was loyal to his king, Mark loved Tristan. They're all plagued by guilt, by prophetic.
So the core conflict is trying to reconcile that private passion with Tristan's public duty, his loyalty.
And this story was just immensely influential. It really lays the groundwork for later archetypes like Lancelot and Guinevere.
It was Chrétien de Troyes, the French court poet, who really polished that Arthurian romance in the 12th century, right?
Yes, he introduced the sophisticated, well-mannered Lancelot, a man who was great in battle, but also in the complicated social world of the court.
This is where we see the rise of what we call courtly love.
Mm-hmm. The idea that a knight's adoration for an unattainable lady would civilize him, spur him to do greater deeds. But what's often missed is who the audience was for them.
Oh, okay.
Many of the most powerful patrons commissioning these works were highly sophisticated aristocratic women who were themselves stuck in political marriages.
So they wanted stories that reflected their own lives.
They sought stories that reflected and articulated their own interesting love life. It gave them a sense of personal agency. These weren't just fables for men. They were a platform for articulating the complex place of women, a world where husbands were often away for years, stayed or out.
It's kind of the beginning of recognizing the internal psychology of women in literature.
A subtle beginning, yeah. Pushing back against the old tropes of women as just bargaining ships.
So while Tristan struggled between passion and loyalty, the great Roman hero Aeneas, he faced an even bigger choice in his affair with Dido. This story elevates love from a personal tragedy to a literal threat against world destiny.
Aeneas and his men, they're refugees who barely escaped the sack of Troy, and they get shipwrecked on the coast of North Africa. They're expecting hostility, but Queen Dido of Carthage offers.
And Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid, he portrays Dido not as a temptress, but as a femina duc.
A capable, competent female leader who, just like Aeneas, had been forced to flee violence and lost her spouse. She saw a reflection of her own sorrow and strength.
But this warm welcome gets ruthlessly exploited by the gods. Venus steps in and enchants Dido to fall helplessly in love with Aeneas.
And it's purely to secure supplies for the Trojans. It's an act of divine.
So poor Dido, she's operating under the sacred rules of hospitality, and her heart is just filled with this uncontrollable passion.
And their relationship is consummated during a storm in a cave, And the sound you hear is the howling of wolves. It's a powerful omen. This is a coupling born of disruption, not blessing.
The thing is, Carthage offered Aeneas a genuine alternative, didn't it? He could have stayed, ruled by her side, found happiness.
A viable alternative, absolutely. But that choice would have meant he would never found the city destined to become Rome. Virgil makes it clear. The entire course of world history is hanging on this one.
And so the god Mercury is sent down to basically shake Aeneas out of his complacency.
To remind him of his duty. And Mercury isn't subtle. He even criticizes Aeneas for the luxurious life he's adopted, specifically calling out a rich purple robe that Dido had.
So Aeneas leaving Dido is meant to be the ultimate example of the Roman male ideal.
The ability to renounce sensuous pleasure, oriental luxury, in favor of duty.
And the power of this story resonates so deeply because of the political world Virgil was writing.
Oh, absolutely. He had just lived through the brutal civil wars, the whole struggle between Mark Antony and Cleopatra. The Aeneas and Dido relationship is a clear political allegory.
Dido is an avatar of Cleopatra.
Seductive, foreign, and potentially destructive to core Roman ideal. Aeneas leaving Dido is basically a narrative showing Rome's founding hero escaping the very Antony-Cleopatra precipice that Octavian had just saved the Republic from.
But the stroke of genius is that Virgil doesn't make her a monster.
No, he transforms her into the poem's most tragic victim. He forces his audience to feel profound sympathy for the defeated enemy. It's an incredibly sophisticated...
If that Roman tale showed love as a political threat, then the ultimate expression of love's destructive potential, especially when you mix in betrayal, has to be the tale of Medea.
Vengeance and maternal rage colliding in a spectacular disaster.
Medea, the daughter of the king of Colchi, was a figure of immense magical power, a sorceress.
And when Jason arrived on his quest for the Golden Fleece, she fell for him completely. She sacrificed everything. She helped him harness fire-breathing bulls, sow serpent's teeth, and kill the dragon guarding the...
She was the indispensable helper maiden. She bore his children, traveled with him, she even committed murder for him, and yet...
And yet that all shattered when Jason abandoned her in Corinth for the daughter of the local king.
For status, a better political match.
Purely for status. And what she did next in her profound, irrational rage is what secured her tragic place in history. She chose to murder the things dearest to her betrayer, their own son.
And the Greek playwright Euripides was the first one to give her this terrifying psychological reality.
He was. He forces the audience to confront these really uncomfortable questions. What drives a human to commit such inhuman act? The story is terrifying precisely because it pits two primal passions. The need for ultimate revenge versus the maternal passion.
The ancient Greeks famously valued sophrosyne restraint, moderation,
self-control. Medea, as an outsider, a sorceress, a figure obsessively in love. She was the embodiment of dangerous, unrestrained passion, the total counterpoint to the ideal Athenian.
And the play just throws a harsh spotlight on a huge societal double standard.
A crucial one. Jason felt perfectly justified in abandoning her for a better political match. Medea, however, was expected to just accept it passively. Euripides, by making the audience live through her escalating murderous rage, forces us to think critically about the societal structures that empower a man like Jason.
And the extreme destructive consequences that can follow when that kind of intense emotion is just dismissed.
Exactly.
What's so fascinating is that all these stories, from the Norse courts to Carthage and Athens, they still speak to us because the nature of this emotion, love, desire, it hasn't fundamentally changed.
It's irrational. It operates outside of our control, and myths serve as this permanent guide to understanding just how perverse human desire is, luring even the smartest heroes into places they should never have gone.
Okay, so if part one was about those internal battles of the human heart, part two zooms out. We're looking at the external world, exploring how societies use myths to cope with collective chaos and rapture.
Yes, when a civilization is shaken, myths become these essential tools. They help define community boundaries, and they provide a narrative framework for debating critical society.
So when the old order starts to crumble,
you desperately need new stories to hang on. These myths exist to question social norms and, paradoxically, to enforce them by showing the terrible consequences of breaking.
And we see this brilliantly in The Pied Piper of Hamelin, a story all about the crisis of the broken bargain.
The price of civic dishonesty, really. The legend as we know it, thanks to the Brothers Grimm, is familiar. The wealthy but rat-infested town of Hamelin refuses to pay the mysterious piper who lured the rat.
And in retribution, he comes back and lures the children away forever.
But it's so important to see how that story evolved. In the earliest versions, there were no rats. The tragedy was just the disappearance of the children.
So the broken bargain part came later.
It came later, probably as a necessary moral justification for the disaster. And that sentimental detail of the little lame boy who couldn't keep up, that was a 19th century addition to really, maximize the emotional punch.
Myths are never static, are they?
Never. They adapt to the emotional needs of their audience.
What stands out in the sources, though, is the historical anchor. The Hamlin Chronicle recorded an event in 1384, so historians agree something real happened back in 1284, which points to some kind of social crisis.
And the most compelling theory, the least supernatural one, is that the legend is really a devastating story of migration.
Migration.
The late 13th century was a time of huge movement across Central Europe. Rulers in Eastern Europe had vast empty lands they needed to settle. They hired agents who went from town to town recruiting people.
Especially young people.
Exact. Young, able-bodied adults who were counted as citizens, not children, in our modern sense. It's highly probable that 100 to 150 of Hamlin's youth just left en masse, hired to settle these vacant lands, which would have felt like a horrific, inexplicable disappearance.
And here's the core takeaway then. The enduring power of the story is the comfort of control it offers.
Yes, the disaster wasn't random cruelty from disease or war. It was caused by the town's moral failure, their greed.
Which implies that if your society is honest, if you avoid Hamlin's mistake, you can prevent catastrophe.
In a time scarred by starvation and conflict, the idea that tragedy is preventable just by obeying the rules is, well, it's hugely psychologically comforting.
Transitioning from a collective contract to individual resistance, let's talk about Robin Hood. He's the quintessential evolving rebel.
A myth that survived precisely because it was so adaptive. His identity, his enemies, his purpose, it all shifts based on the anxieties.
So in the earliest ballads from the 14th century, he wasn't a nobleman.
None at all. He was a yeoman, a member of the social class just above a peasant, a free man, skilled with a bow, but not gentle. And that was a crucial distinction.
Because the early stories were vicarious for the common man against authority.
During an era of plague, feudal strife, constant unrest, he was portrayed as smarter, a better shot, with a kind of innate moral intelligence that was superior to the toofs, the wealthy officials with their account.
That made him a dangerous figure for the aristocracy to manage.
Undeniably popular, though. We know even King Henry VIII dressed up as Robin Courtpad. But by the 16th century, with the Protestant Reformation, his enemies started
From sheriffs to
corrupt Catholic priests. The myth was absorbing and articulating the contemporary religious conflict.
But the myth itself faced a threat, didn't it? The crown became more centralized. This man of the people fighting the establishment needed to be, well, domestic.
And this is where the playwright Anthony Mundy's intervention was critical. He transformed Robin into the exiled Earl of Huntingdon.
Which was a brilliant move of statecraft.
It was. By making him an aristocrat, the conflict fundamentally changed. Robin was now only fighting corrupt authority sheriffs, but he remained fiercely loyal to the true king.
It reinforced the social structure.
Yeah?
It neutralized him as a symbol of class revolution.
Exactly. The fault lay with bad individuals, not the system itself.
And the myth kept changing. By the 19th century, the industrial age, figures like Walter Scott recast him again.
As the romantic figure. Charming, a true blue monarchist. It fit the Victorian need for rural nostalgia in the face of this terrifying, grimy urbanization, and it fueled a muscular English nationalism for the expanding British Empire.
So his ultimate appeal is this dual identity.
He's a figure of comforting, permanent tradition and a relentless rule breaker. Hollywood still uses him as a cultural barometer to question pressing issues, whatever they may be. He's a tradition that gives us license to ask radical questions.
Shifting now from socioeconomic debate to existential terror, let's talk about the profound crisis of belief that fueled the devastating Bamberg witch hunts in the 17th century.
The sheer overwhelming context of chaos is what gave rise to this myth of internal betrayal.
It's inseparable from the trauma of the 30 Years' War.
A war that ravaged the Holy Roman Empire, almost 8 million casualties. And alongside that, you have profound religious upheaval, Catholic versus Protestant. When every certainty is destabilized, people desperately look for an absolute external evil to blame.
Enter the Prince Bishop of Bamberg, Jan Georg von der.
The witch burn. He was utterly committed to suppressing Protestant and enforcing his own narrow vision of Catholic purity. And he brutally exploited his office to conduct the most systematic witch hunts in Europe.
The records are chillingly detailed. He built a dedicated witch house.
A 2-story building with 28 cells and torture chambers. And the use of lavish torture thumb screws, the boots designed to crush the leg, it was all calculated to secure false confession. We have a letter from the former mayor, smuggled out, detailing how he was forced to name names just to make the stop.
And this wasn't just driven by religious zealotry. It was a moral panic rooted in a sense of unnatural chaos.
Yes, we have to remember the climate. The medieval warm period had ended. The 16th century ushered in the Little Ice Age.
Frozen rivers, crop failures, famine.
Year after year. And people are very reluctant to believe that nature is as violently changeable as when your harvest fails repeatedly, the weather seems actively malevolent. It seems against the course.
So the collective mind seeks a supernatural, malicious reason.
And the myth of the witch became a necessary explanation for incomprehensible environmental environmental disaster.
If the witch hunts were a reaction to chaos in the country, Spring-Heeled Jack was a completely new myth, forged in the suffocating industrial nightmare of the Victorian city.
The Industrial Revolution fundamentally transformed Britain. It created this new anonymous landscape. The heavens were veiled in black smoke. Old village certainties shattered as these massive, crowded cities, the Rooker, expanded.
And when you have this new, terrifying nightmare landscape of smog and dark streets, you need a new mythology to process. The old folkloric demons just...
The first rumors of Spring-Heeled Jack started to circulate widely. At first, he was just a vague white bull or bear, but he quickly evolved into something more specific. An unearthly visitant, clad in armor and long-clawed gloves,
who attacked women and escaped with impossible leaps over rooftops.
In the media, especially the cheap penny dreadfuls, they just cemented this myth. They were produced for the new, literate, working-class audience that loved a good, visceral scare.
So why did Jack...
He was the perfect urban legend, supernatural criminal embodying modern fear. His rumored metal claws, his breath like a furnace. He was the dark, mechanized personification.
An emanation of the Industrial Revolution itself.
Part of a modern demonology hidden in the anonymous city mask. He embodied the darkness, smog, and the terror of the Victorian age in a way no rural ghost ever.
So we come now to the final and, I guess, most universal certainty for all humans.
Yeah.
Mortality. And myths about the afterlife, about death, they seem to tell us far more about the living than they do about the dead.
Absolute. What a culture believes about death is less a statement of fact and more a profound picture of the inside of that collective mind.
It reveals what they value, what a good death is versus a terrible one.
And what our responsibilities are to the family, the community, and the gods when that transition happens.
Let's begin in the Norse cosmos with maybe the most beloved and pure figure, the beautiful doomed god, Balder.
Balder was the son of Odin and Frigg. He's described as fair, wise, and so literally shining that light emanated from him. And of course, such perfection in mythology often signals an inevitable, tragic fate.
Both he and his mother, Frigg, had these ominous dreams about his death.
And Frigg, frantic to save him, she travels to all 9 realms, extracting solemn promises from everything in existence, every stone, every plant, every animal, that they would never harm.
But she makes one fateful mistake, a tiny oversight.
She didn't ask the mistletoe. She dismissed it as too small and weak to be a threat, and that was all the opening that Loki, the Chaos Bringer, needed.
Crafts the mistletoe into a dart.
And then tricks Balder's blind brother, Hod, into throwing it at him during a game. The dart pierces Balder's heart, and the most beloved of the gods falls dead. Asgard is plunged into sorrow.
The version of this story we rely on most heavily was compiled by Snorri Sturluson, a 13th century Icelandic poet and politician.
And critically, Snorri was a Christian, writing for an audience that was transitioning into Christianity. So critics suggest you can detect a significant Christological influence telling of the Balders.
He wasn't just recording paganism then. He was harmonized.
He was creating a coherent narrative that would appeal to his contemporary. In his version, Balder is mild, joyful, there's a Christological, a beautiful figure doomed to die who is briefly resurrected.
So the myth served as a cultural bridge.
A critical one. It allowed a smoother transition from the chaotic, fatalistic pagan world into the more structured Christian world of morality.
Moving from the Norse doomed god to Greek moral calculus, we have the enduring dilemma of Antigone, the tension between the laws of the dead and the laws of the king.
And for the ancient Greeks, proper burial was, as you put it, insanely important. It wasn't about sentimentality, it was a spiritual necessity.
Without the correct rituals, the soul couldn't transition to the underworld.
It would be trapped in this miserable, dissatisfied state, doomed to wander.
And the tragic setup is that Antigone's 2 brothers kill each other fighting for the throne. The new king, Creon, decrees that the loyal brother gets a hero's burial, but the traitor, Polynices, must be left to rot.
A public disgrace and a defiance of divine man.
So Antigone faces this impossible choice, and she chooses to defy state law. She just sprinkles a little bit of earth over her brother's body,
which was enough to satisfy the laws of the gods and free his soul. But Creon, who is all about absolute state authority, is furious and orders her to be sealed alive in a cave.
The tragedy just exposes this compelling moral tension that every generation has to debate, doesn't it?
It really does. Antigone defies the state to follow her conscience and the law of the god, but it forces you to ask, at what point must you do something in complete defiance of the law? Is her action pure piety, or is it a radical individualism that undermines the social contract?
And Creon's subsequent loss of his son and his wife illustrates the terrible cost of defying that divine order.
It does. And in 5th century Athens, the state was already beginning to eclipse the individual. When soldiers died, their burials became public, collective affairs. Antigone's choice to prioritize family and divine law was a direct challenge not just to Creon, but to the rising power of the Athenian imperial state itself.
So the Greeks were worried about the unburied dead, but other cultures had a far deeper, more universal fear that the dead wouldn't just wander, they would return to actively damage the living.
Which brings us to the fear of the revenant, the folklore vampire.
The underlying belief that the dead will return to sort of nourish themselves in some parasitical way is almost universal.
It's a primal anxiety. Once the dead are dead, we desperately want them to stay dead.
And this anxiety manifested spectacularly in the notorious Kilisova incident in Serbia in 1725. 9 people died in a week with no obvious...
An imperial official from Vienna arrived, and the villagers insisted on opening the grave of a first man.
What he documented was shock. The body was pink and fat, his hair and nails had grown, and his mouth was wet with the fresh blood of his victim.
Which today we understand as natural decomposition. Gases pooling blood, the skin, hair, and nails appear. But the villagers interpreted it as the terrifying folklore vampire, or revenant.
This wasn't Dracula. This was a bloated, slavering, dead person causing death by contagion.
And they immediately drove a stake through its heart and burned the body.
And this incident, because it was documented by officials, fueled a vampire panic across Europe. It captivated 19th century Enlightenment.
Intellectuals who were looking for alternate, non-Christian death stories to explain human terror.
And this is where the literary transformation starts.
It is. Writers like Lord Byron and John Polidori took that horrifying concept of the bloated peasant revenant and refined. They created the elegant, aristocratic night walker, handsome, refined, who represents death, but also profound sexual attraction.
Which culminates, of course, in Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897.
Stoker's story of an ancient nobleman from the primitive East infiltrating modern Victorian Britain is a sophisticated political critique.
A story of reverse colonialization.
Exactly, an element of pollution and destruction from the East infiltrating the metro. The literary vampire became this powerful vehicle for articulating society's deepest cultural anxieties about invasion, morality, and degen. That's why
Finally, let's end with the grand narratives of destruction and new life. On one hand, you have the cataclysmic end of the Norse world, Ragnarok.
Ragnarok is the final, predetermined destiny of the god. The great final battle where all the monsters are unleashed and all fall. Odin, Thor, Freya, the entire cosmos consumed by fire and earth.
It reflects that deep, universal sled motif you find in almost every mythology.
The ultimate expression of fatalism and cyclical.
But on the other hand, you have the quieter, domestic Roman tale of Baucis and Philemon from Ovid.
A story written during the stable period of the Emperor Augustus, and it fits his political narrative of restoring piety and moral tradition.
The gods Jupiter and Mercury come to Earth disguised as peasants, and a whole village turns them away.
Only one poor, humble cottage belonging to the aged couple, Baucis and Philemon, offers them hospitality. They give everything they have.
And the gods reward their piety. The whole proud village is destroyed by a flood, but their humble cottage is transformed into a magnificent temple.
And Baucis and Philemon, as their reward, ask only to serve the temple together and never be separated. And when their time comes, they don't die. They're transformed into 2 magnificent, entwined trees, an oak and a linden standing together forever.
It's a story that offers profound creation from destruction.
A guarantee that through piety and humility, there is lasting peace and new, enduring life. Hashtag outro.
What we've seen today, I think, digging into all these sources, is that myths endure because they tell us the immutable truth about human desires. They reveal, without any apology, how fundamentally irrational human desire is.
It operates so far outside the realm of rational control.
Yeah.
And so mythology is ultimately a guide to understanding the way we feel, not the way we think. The fact that a myth might be completely nonsensical on a logical level, it's irrelevant.
Because it still perfectly encapsulates our culture and our deepest fears and aspirations.
Exactly.
Myths are this eternal dialogue. They're the ultimate narrative vehicle for ethical, social, and cultural conflicts, whether that is in ancient Alice or medieval Hamlin or on the frozen seas of the North. They link us to our past, our present, and our future.
And the fundamental human questions remain utterly unchanged. Who are we, really, beneath the veneer of civilization? Why is the world governed by such chaos? And what will we find beyond this life?
And since myths are constantly evolving, we saw a spring-heeled Jack emerge from industrial smog and the vampire transform from a revenant to an aristocrat. You have to ask, what new myths are being forged right now in our digital, globalized, anxious world? What narrative, what figure will define our deepest anxieties for future generations?
Fascinating.
It is, and it's something truly worth mulling over.